Hi everyone, welcome back. So if you're like me, you might have drawn a picture or done a painting and you think something is missing. It doesn't quite catch the attention of the viewer in the way that you want. Now, why is this? One of the reasons might be that your picture is missing a focal point. Now, a focal point is just a center or point of interest that has been designed to attract the viewer's attention. Now, how do we create focal points? Now, there are many different ways among art to do this, and I'm going to show you one today, and that is using leading lines. Now, leading lines are basically just artificial lines that we create and manipulate in order to send the viewer's eye to a certain direction. So, let's get started, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, let's talk about focal points. Now, what is a focal point? This is just a point of interest within your drawing or painting. It's where you want the viewer's eye to go to. So let's look at an example here from Manchester. This is Sinclair's Oyster Bar. I have painted this so many times, but you can see that your eye is automatically drawn towards this white building there. So before I started drawing this, I decided that I wanted this building, this old kind of mock Tudor style building, to be the center of interest or the focal point. Now I've done this by using a bit of contrast. You've got a bit of contrast with the white front of the building here and the soft edges of the trees in the background, and also by having this nice shadow here that dulls things down. So you can see this area is nice and sharp, whereas this is a lot softer. There's not much detail there. And this is just one example of how, if you plan your picture from the start and you think, or you ask yourself the question, what do I want my focal point to be? Then you can create a composition where your eye immediately gets directed to a point. Let's look at another example. This is a picture from the Lake District here in the UK, and you can see your attention is automatically drawn to this building here. Again, I've used a few different tips and tricks to try and create that focal point. One of them is the contrast in color. Everything here is kind of a green shape, and this is the only part of the scene that's done in a slightly different color. It's also the only part that's done in a slightly different texture as well. Now, one of the most important techniques for creating a focal point, which is going to be the focus of this tutorial, is leading lines. Now, what are leading lines? Basically, they are just artificially created lines that direct the viewer's attention toward your focal point. Now just take a look at this picture from Dubrovnik that I did a few months ago in Croatia and try to figure out what is the focal point for you. Now, where does your eye go automatically? Now my plan was this, is that your eye is automatically drawn to this section here with this bell tower. And what I've done is I've used the leading lines, or these lines of perspective, to direct your eye inwards. So you can see that your eye is drawn towards this point. And we have one leading line that follows the top of this building here, pointing down, and another one that points this way. So these leading lines in this scene are quite simple. I'm just using those perspective lines to help support a composition. A lot of the times with a street scene, the perspective lines will help you out. They will act as leading lines anyway. But you also see we have some other leading lines. For example, the tip of this umbrella is pointing down, again, towards this point. So this umbrella is also supporting this line too. And again, we've got the bottom part of these buildings here that are pointing inwards. So you can see that in this sense, leading lines are just the perspective lines. I've recycled them and used them to support this composition. Let's look at a few other examples. Now here's a picture from Edgar Payne. If you've done the composition video, you'll know that Edgar Payne has a really, really good book about simplifying compositions into shapes. And although he mainly does landscape pictures like this, actually you can apply any of these rules into your own street scenes or urban sketching or whatever it is you like to do. So yeah, let's look at this example. So take a look at this picture. What is the focal point, first of all? Well, for me, it is this guy here with his donkeys. So clearly, obviously, that is so different from the rest of the background. It's the only person, it's the only animals in the scene. They're some of the darkest as well. So they want your attention to be drawn there. So have a quick look. What lines can you see that have been created to support that focal point? So the first one is obvious. It's actually this snow here. So you can see these snow lines are looping round toward this figure here. We also have the line of this lake here that's pointing directly there. And we also have more lines coming down this way. So you can see leading lines don't have to always be buildings. They can be any kind of natural or human object within a page that just supports your focal point. And this is quite a good scene because there's a lot happening, but because there's a lot happening, you created multiple lines that all feed in to the same point. One thing that's interesting to note here is that in some cases, the focal point is resting on the leading line, not at the end of it. So notice how this man with the donkeys here is not at the end of the leading line, it's actually on top of it. So that line kind of gets interrupted and you find your focal point there. Let's look at another example here. And now this is not even a painting, but you can immediately see when you start to look at these pictures and think, where are my leading lines? You can see this river is snaking into the distance and your eye is automatically drawn to this focal point here. If any of you are photographers or really like photography, you'll notice that a lot of good photographers will do this quite a lot. Now, they don't have the opportunity to move things around in the way that sketchers and painters do. They have to use whatever objects they have. So in this case, the river. But you also have the mountains here that are pointing down. So again, leading lines can be rivers, they can be snow, they can be mountains, they can be any objects you want. So here's another example from Monet, and now I'm talking about leading lines being different objects, and they can also go in different directions. So you can see here that actually these collection of boats are almost forming a curving leading line, leading your eye into the distance. So that's one leading line going in one direction. You also have the beach here that's curving around to another point. You could argue that perhaps the slanted rock here is another leading line, but you can see leading lines don't have to go in the same direction. Let's look at another picture by Edgar Payne. Now that you've got a little bit used to seeing leading lines in different objects, take a look at this picture. Where is the focal point? And what artificial lines can you see that are supporting that focal point? So if you guessed sort of correctly, I think the focal point is effectively these two people here. Edgar Payne was really, really good at inserting people into a natural scene. So even though the nature was in many ways the most important thing, it was taking up most of the space on the page, he was really, really good at inserting these tiny, tiny figures that your eye was drawn to. And you can see he draws this mainly with the clouds. So you can see this cloud is sort of looping down toward the center of the picture here. Now this wouldn't work so much if this was just an empty sky, or if there were so many clouds. It works because you have this big central cloud leading down. You also have another line down here with this shadow. Again, similar to the other mountain pictures, you have a line here and you have your focal point on that line. And I think that is very, very important. Now, I'm going to go slightly off topic here, and I'm going to take a few pieces of inspiration from cinema. Now, you remember I said that photographers would often do this. They also do it in film as well. And one thing I really, really like to study is storyboards. So if you can guess this film, this is 2001, A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick film. And this is quite a famous shot, you might recognize it. But it's really, really using this idea of leading lines to direct your viewer's attention toward the focal point. Now, when you work in film, obviously, if you're a set designer, you can construct a scene, much like a painter or drawer can construct, in order to get what you want. And what they've done here is they created this tunnel, and they created these artificial lines that radiate from the astronaut here. So it creates this great focus. You'll see this quite a lot in science fiction films. If you've seen Rogue One, Star Wars film, they have a very, very similar scene to this, where the main character is, her head is in this scene with these radiating lines. Let's take another example here. You'll recognize this is from Jurassic Park. And we've got this idea of different kinds of leading lines. So you can see the focal point for me is probably either this sign or this car. I would say probably it's the arch in itself. In this scene of the movie, they're just about to enter the park and you want to get a nice scale of what you're seeing. And this is supported by the trees. They're going down here and the trees are going down here, all focusing toward this archway. Same is true of the road as well. Kind of, it's a very, very subtle curve there, heading toward this point. One more movie for you. This is Back to the Future. This is a poster rather than a scene from a movie. But again, because we're looking at compositions, we are looking at people arranging objects in a kind of useful way. I think this is also important. So we've got to see the main character, Michael J. Fox, Marty McFly, is in the center of this image. We've also got these radiating lines from the light coming out of the car. Now, in the movie, there is no bright light in the car like this. They've done this deliberately for the poster. And the reason for that is because it creates a nice focal point here. You've also got a nice bit of contrast between the dark here and then the light on the inside. You also have the flame tracks, or the flaming tire marks. Again, they don't even really match up with where the car is. They're artificial, but they work to direct your attention to this point. And again, you've got this shadow here that's all angling and all directing your eye toward this same. So there we go. That is a brief introduction to leading lines. Now what we will do is we're going to apply these to a kind of more ordinary street scene. And this is the scene that I've chosen. This is in Chester, here in the UK. I like to pick scenes that are not particularly interesting, or that, perhaps the lighting isn't very good, perhaps the composition is not quite what we want, because we are free to change this. So from looking at this scene here, we've got our eye level or horizon line here. We've got a bit of perspective moving in, but we need to decide what our focal point is, or where we want people's attention to go. And I think what I would like to do is I would like to create a focal point underneath this archway. I'm going to add in a few more people here, maybe a bit more light. And I'm going to direct people's attention here. You can see right now, your attention is not really in this location. There's a lot of different objects. Your attention is sort of jumping around to quite a few different places. It's really hard to tell where your eye should be going. So what I will do is I'm going to manipulate the perspective. Perspective lines are going down here. I'm going to exaggerate those a little bit to point more towards here. I'm going to increase the light in here. I'm going to add a few more colors for people so that your attention goes there. I'm probably going to make people in the foreground darker. I'm going to remove a lot of this and again angle it more so it points down. Same thing with these objects. I may even arrange the people in such a way that it snakes to that point. So let's get started with this drawing. Okay, so the materials I'm using for this, I'm going to keep it simple. We're just using mixed media paper. We don't need any watercolor for this, and I'm just using a HB pencil. I normally draw in pencil that it's a lot lighter, but because I'm using a video here, I need to have something a bit thicker so it shows up. So I've got my reference image here, and what I'm going to do is just to do a very quick thirds, just to split it off, and I'm going to use this as my horizon line. Now, what I will do first, I think, is that focal point. I'm going to sit it on this point here, and we're going to do that arch. But remember, I said that I'm going to exaggerate the perspective of that arch. So yeah, it is a lot more exaggerated than the photo. Then we're going to add in this building here. So I'm just reminding myself roughly where these perspective lines are. And already we get a sense of these leading lines. They're moving toward this point. And we're going to add in this hole here, but you can see I'm actually making it at more of an angle. So I'm deliberately distorting the perspective in order to create this as a focal point. Now I'm just doing some shapes here. I will come back in for the details a bit later. Now the other one is this clock tower that's really cool. Again, I'm going to distort the perspective in order to reinforce my focal point. And we have this building in the background here. Now often when I'm drawing in ink, I will do very, very rough drawing lines. So I'm going to add in a bit of the street here. And I think I will add in some people. Because I don't want there to be nobody in this picture. Like that. But remember, I do want the focal point to be here. So I want to arrange some people in such a way that it draws your attention to here. So let's add some people here, first of all. Let's imagine it's kind of a line like this. So let's add in another person here. One looks to me like they're kind of standing. So you've already got a nice bit of progression there toward some of those people. Now I'm going to make this a bit longer. Again, I want to reinforce that leading line going into this central point. So I think those shapes look really good. I'm reasonably happy with the shapes. Now it's a question of details. How do I reinforce this area? So what I will do is I'm actually not going to put much detail here. We can add in a little bit of shadows, a little bit of fake detail. If you've done the expressive sketching video, you'll notice some of these techniques. Because really this is just an object, and it's an object that serves a function, but this object itself is not really why I am doing this picture. Now, if I was doing this in ink, obviously I would spend a bit more time to do a lot of this detail. But for this, I am not. I'm actually going to add in one more line here, because I think that will actually help direct your attention here. Now, if you'll notice on the reference image here, let's have a look. We've got this brickwork, and this brickwork is really good because it radiates out of this arch. So I think I'm going to emphasize that a little bit around the edge of this archway. So I'm actually going to make it bigger. And we've got this crest on top. I've just add a bit of shading here because I think this contrast between the two is very, very important. So notice how there's a tiny bit of pavement here, and actually I think that's useful. I'm going to put it on the other side, kind of point toward this section. And then got this person here. Now I think I'm going to make them my focal point, and I'm going to do that by perhaps making this person light, and then all the other people behind, I think, I'm going to make a bit darker. So this person really stands out. And again, I'm sort of just playing with the different objects here. And then let's get this clock tower. Again, the clock tower is not the main object, it is just a tool that reinforces the things. And that's kind of the same for this building behind. And I think this is really, really important when you're drawing, is that you need to understand what it is that you want to show, or what the story is that you want to tell. Because when you get a complicated scene like this, you can't really do everything. There is a temptation just to draw absolutely everything on the page, and you need to really narrow your focus, like build a composition around it. So this building, I'm not really giving it a great amount of attention. And there is a little door there, but I'm going to add that in. And we've got some people here, and I am going to add in a bit of detail, but not too much. And again, we're following that same rule as before, is I want to make these people a little bit darker. Now, if I was painting this, again, I could also use color to reinforce this. And I think I'm going to add in another person in the background here. So I think that's good. And let's add in a few more of these perspective lines from this shop, because again, this is where it can really reinforce the composition. So I'm not really focusing on accuracy with this. I mean, if I was doing a proper ink drawing, I would pay a lot more attention to getting these details right. But the main thing is just the direction. I am going to add in this sign here, because I think it provides a nice bit of contrast. I'm actually going to add in a few lanterns. I know there's only one in the picture, but I think this again kind of reinforces this area here. And then finally, this building. It's hard to know when to stop, because with something like this, you want to keep going. But if I can continue on with this composition, I keep going, it will lose the focus here. And that is why it's really, really important to kind of have a bit of a plan with your composition. And I'm deliberately leaving this area blank so that you kind of have one line leading in this way. One of the final things I'm going to do is to add in a bit on the road, because these road lines kind of radiate outwards, if you remember the Back to the Future picture. And now it's just a question of using a bit of light and darks to emphasize that focal point. So remember, it's not just about leading lines, it's also about these other objects. So I'm going to cheat slightly and leave this archway a lot lighter than it actually is in the picture. And yeah, let's go back in here to darken up some of these people in order to make this person the focal point. I'm also using these shadows here, so I thought these shadows would be quite a nice additional leading line. So there we have it. This is a very, very simple composition, but you can see if we put them side by side the changes I've made. I've warped the perspective and the angles of a lot of these buildings. I have created a center of attention here by adding in a lot of leading lines. So let's see if you can recognize them. We've got one big one that's going in this direction, pointing downwards, and that's also reinforced below. By leaving a bit of negative space, we have created one line that is swooping down towards these people. Again, we have a line here because I've changed the angle of this building. And we've got these people that start off big and they get smaller. That combined with the lines from the road have created a point where your eye heads towards this section. And also don't underestimate the power of this arch. Arches are a great way to direct your eye. So your eye might start here and move down the arch. So I am actually going to include the arch here as another leading line. If you wanted to get really picky, you could also say that this building, because its perspective is down this way, it is also angling. So you can see quite a few different combinations here of leading lines, and they all serve to reinforce this area here as the center of attention. So I hope this is useful. What I'd like you to do is take one of the extra reference images that I've put, have a little look, and try and play around with the composition. Try and use some leading lines in order to direct attention towards a specific point. When you start looking at movies or paintings or photography now, you'll start seeing these lines absolutely everywhere, and they are really, really useful for directing your attention and basically creating sort of stronger compositions. Okay, thanks everyone for joining, and I will see you next time.